Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and I have a super simple tutorial to share with you today. We are making our own knitting needles and I have 3 ways to show you. All of the materials for this project are listed on the blog post that accompanies this video. You can find the link to that blog post in the description box below. The first way we're going to make our knitting needles is with a sharpener. This is the fastest, easiest way, but it's not the way that I recommend doing it with children. But this is a super simple way if you need a quick way to make your own knitting needles. So I'm showing you that I have sharpened it a little bit, but not quite enough. And if you sharpen it all the way through till it's a sharp point, then you will want to sand that down a little bit. You can see that this is not quite sharpened all the way to a sharp point. It is a little bit blunt, and personally that's the way that I like my beginner knitting needles. And then you want to use some sandpaper to smooth it out. You want to make sure that you spend a good amount of time making sure that it's nice and smooth. I have 320 and 220 sandpaper. If you go with too rough of a sandpaper to begin with, you will alter the tip. So you want to go light with this and make sure that you test it as you go to make sure that it's the smoothness that you want and that you don't alter the shape of your tip, because you can easily do that with your sandpaper. I also want to make sure that the dowel itself is smooth, so I used 320 sandpaper. You can even go with a higher sandpaper as well. And if you don't have wood oil, you can use some beeswax polish in order to polish up your dowels and make them nice and smooth so that when you're knitting, your yarn glides smoothly on your knitting needles. And I am trying to avoid the very bottom tip because we are going to put our bead on the very tip, and I just want to make sure that the glue will adhere really well. I'm also going to add a little bit of the polish to the bead as well. And then you want to make sure that you secure this really well with some wood glue. And I'm going to just put one little drop of wood glue right into that bead, and then we can adhere it to our dowel. And if you put too much glue, then it's going to seep out around the edges. And these beads fit on the dowel just right. And so I'm just going to twist it a little bit to get that glue all around the tip of the dowel. And then we just want to let it dry thoroughly before you start using it. You can also use polymer clay and a glue gun to adhere your beads onto your dowels. So I'm going to set these aside and let them dry thoroughly before we use them. And in the meantime, I'm going to show you another way to make some knitting needles. This time we're going to move outside. You want to find an area with some concrete or even a rough stone so that you can start to sand down your dowels using a rock or a stone. I'm just outside of my backyard with the concrete, and this does take a little bit more time. You do want to make sure that it's a dry day. You want to find a piece of stone or concrete that's rough enough in order to sand this down. Once they're sanded down, and you can see they're not as pointy as the ones with the sharpener, it's time to sand down the tip so it's nice and smooth. Same with the dowel. Then it's time to use our polish and add those beads to the tops of our dowels. And then we're going to set these aside while we work on one more version. So this one you can do entirely indoors. I am pulling from my sandpaper. I have sandpaper that's about 120 grit that I think will work well with this. Even if you had 80 grit, that would work as well. And I'm just going to sand this down using some sandpaper. So if the weather's not great outside and you still want the process of sanding it down by hand, I think this is a great alternative. It takes longer than the sharpener, but not as long as working outside. So this is the tip that I want, but now I'm going to finely sand it, add my beeswax polish and my bead, and we are done. So 3 different ways to make these knitting needles. It is cherished by my children. They love to make their own knitting needles as the introduction to their first lesson for knitting. And once we're done with our knitting needles and they are ready to use, then we can start on our first project. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget to check out the blog post that accompanies this video, where you can find links to all of the materials that I used, as well as other tutorials for handwork. You can find the link to that blog post in the description box below. And if you'd like to see what kind of handwork projects we're doing on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram and now on TikTok at Pepper and Pine.